Hi everybody, and welcome back to session 2 of the Construction Contracts Conference, sponsored by HKA. Hope you've enjoyed the online conference experience so far, the exhibition space and the networking space. All new experience for most of us, but hopefully it's been a good time for you. So in this session, we're going to have a look at the impact of COVID-19 on NEC contracts with a focus on NEC 3, NEC 4, option A, option C, and also the short form. Our speakers for this session, Andrew Drennan is a principal at HKA. Mark Denham Smith is the commercial director at Shepley Group, and Veronica Flint Williams is the contracts and risk manager at the Environment Agency, who will be joining us shortly. A minor technical hitch there, but we're confident she'll be with us in the next minute or so. So we'll hear first from Andrew, who's going to introduce the session, talk a little bit more about what is planned, and then we'll have some predetermined questions. And then again, as per session 1, we'll go to you, the audience, if you can use the chat function down the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll bring you into the discussion. So thank you very much, and I'll hand you over to Andrew.
Thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us this afternoon. What we're going to do is focus on our experiences in NEC contracts with a particular emphasis on COVID-19. Just a wee bit about our background. I think Phil has probably given HK an introduction in the earlier session. HK are a global construction consultancy firm where we provide expert services such as quantum engineering delay, as well as forensic accounting. Now, we do that in an expert capacity, so in litigations, arbitrations, adjudication. We also do a lot of work with contractors and employers where we could progress claims or defend claims. So hopefully this session will be quite a useful insight into some of the experiences. I know from previous commissions I've worked on, I've actually been involved with Mark in a job in Sellafield. So hopefully some of Mark's adverse experiences are nothing to do with anything I've done. So Phil, looking forward to the session, and hopefully we can get Veronica online quite soon.
Thank you, Andrew. So let's go straight into this, Mark, with the sort of the million-dollar question, really. I'd like to, if you can reference sort of your current experience of NEC contracts and your view, really, of the effect that COVID-19 has had on the industry so far.
I think in terms of the industry so far, I think it's been terrible. It's decimated it. We've had all manners of I think all companies have been sort of scrabbling for the lifeboats. Certainly our experience, we've had various clients taking various approaches. It's only really now things are starting to settle down. So to pick up your point on the NEC, we've tackled it and we've sort of had 2 areas. We've tackled it primarily as a Section X2 change in the law. We've generally got CEs covered for that. And the emphasis and the trigger for that has been the Coronavirus Act, March 2020, which obviously covers us anything signed prior to that point. Anything prior to that point we're covered. We're slightly luckier on Sellafield because we have individual projects in individual buildings on a wider employer site. Where the employer has actually shut the site, we've then received definite instructions to stop work, and that's been a straight CE under 60.14. So we've been rather lucky that way, whereas elsewhere in the country, we've just been reliant upon sort of individual sites, individual projects. So that's really our experience up at Sellafield, and we're still restricted from site, and it's still something we're trying to work through the ramifications.
So the jobs that you were on, Mark, were you were sites shut down?
Yes, site itself was shut. We've also got a manufacturing business that's off-site manufacture. That's West Cumberland Engineering. They've been able to carry on production, albeit with social distancing in a limited capacity. There's been some disruption there to their operations, and that's really where we've pushed the secondary option X2 CE. Again, we've generally been fairly successful, in fairness.
So what's been the reaction of your client? Did you guys shut the site down, or did your clients enforce that?
The client enforced it. There must be 1,000 odd buildings on Sellafield. It's a huge site. All our works are either inside the initial fence or inside various live plants, and decisions made by the client to just basically shut things down and stop all the contracts. So contractually, it's a lot easier to prove entitlement contractually. The hard thing is just quantum.
So when did Sellafield start to open again?
It's still in the process of trying to open.
Okay. And that's because presumably of the significant health and safety issues on site there and the security issues, it's taking longer than some of the other sites.
Yeah, and to maintain social distancing in a very constrained workforce. I mean, some of our buildings are probably sort of a couple of, you may have a work area the size of a large house with 20 people in it, all the various workplaces. You're not going to be able to maintain 2 meters in that kind of environment.
Andrew, while we're sort of waiting for Veronica, hoping that we're getting her in now, we're nearly there. I keep getting messages from my colleagues to tell us she'll be with us soon. So, from your experience, what's been the impact of COVID-19 on NEC with the sort of clients and the contracts that you're exposed to at the moment?
Yeah, I suppose to echo Mark's experiences, we're obviously involved at a stage where jobs are potentially in dispute or suffering some kind of issue somewhere. So a lot of our clients, rather than looking at our traditional type of work, such as the kind of quantum and delay side predominantly, the focus has been on the front end, so getting health and safety, logistics, all that kind of stuff, getting that side of the business organised. So we have had quite a few calls, which is, what do we think? What do we think the impacts would be? What should contractors and employers do in terms of notifications and receiving notifications? So there's been a lot of buzz, certainly a lot of action. Probably steering away from our traditional work, if you like. But certainly our guys have been kept really busy. I think in terms of where we're going to go going forward, I think especially now that things are starting to relax a little bit, that I think once things are up and running, that people like Mark will probably be giving us a call to look at various issues in the near future. So yeah, it's busy, but certainly a different type of busy for us.
Good stuff. Veronica, hi, can you hear us? Talk to us, Veronica.
I can indeed. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I am talking to you.
Okay, good stuff. Right then, guys, what was that?
Is that coming through loud and clear?
We're going to save up
okay?
Veronica then. So, there's a bit of a delay, but hopefully there's a bit of a delay. It's like talking to someone in Australia at the moment. So hopefully you can keep up with the conversation, Veronica. So you've not missed much. We were just Mark and Andrew were just sharing their experiences of sort of COVID-19 and the NEC contract and, the impact that it's having on the industry. So from your perspective, in terms of the Environment Agency, what's it sort of meant to you over the last 3 months?
I mean, the key perspective that we have is that we are very reliant on our suppliers, consultants and contractors in order to deliver our program. Now, we clearly have a need to those workers to keep safe, and us also to keep the public safe. But we took a view that the work of the Environment Agency is actually also to protect life. I mean, I think many people who have suffered the floods earlier on this year will be feeling very much how flooding incidents impact on their life. And so where it was safe to do so, we wished our flood protection schemes to continue. And really what we wanted to do was quickly get our suppliers on side, remove that very great concern that they had that COVID-19 was happening and that would impact their businesses, that in effect, using the latest public procurement notes, we were able and essentially we were empowered to do what was necessary in order to make those slight changes that we needed to. The original position that we had under really pretty much all our frameworks were that we had written out force majeure in its purest sense from our contracts, and that obviously left our suppliers in these very particular circumstances at a higher level of risk than we felt was right under these circumstances. This is not a normal risk, and whilst suppliers are concerned, they clearly are very distracted from serving their client. They cannot do that when they're worried for their own survival. So we took the view that we were empowered to effectively make the really changes back to ensure that there was a remedy available. It is, so we made that decision quite quickly, and I would say that has paid off for us. For the greatest part, our suppliers have, where possible, continued to deliver, and we're very grateful for that. And they have done what is important, remembering we're talking about the public purse here. They have mitigated their losses to the minimum necessary for them to keep going and keep working safely. And that is working well for us. I think I would like to just highlight that to people, because it's worth looking out for, that initial public procurement notice, so PPN 0220, actually expires on the 30th of June. And in fact, today, PPN 0420 has been published, and that therefore extends the potential for remedies from the 1st of July to the 31st of October. So I think that is good news, because obviously it's mirroring much of the other furloughing type remedies that are available.
So you talked about the contractors on the framework were acting. It sounded like they're acting very honourably to carry on, maintaining safety standards. But from a contractual point of view, forgive me if this is the $1 million question. Is there not going to be a sting in the tail to this? Is this not going to impact on claims for either time or cost in the future? Or is it because you don't have the force majeure in your contracts that you have a way around this?
We effectively are accepting that there will be a need for a remedy from our contractors and our consultants. We actually took the view that to deny our suppliers a route to a remedy was actually cutting our own nose off to spite our face, actually, because if we deny our suppliers that route, then in reality, they're not going to give two hoots about us as a client and our needs and what best fits the delivery of our program. And we regard our program as being one that is of great benefit to society. So we are accepting there is an additional cost. We're accepting that under the NEC, the price will move and that defined cost will also increase.
Okay.
So yes, we have been more than fair, but I take the view, if we're more than fair, we will then enact that contract exactly as that contract has been revised to be.
Okay. We talked a bit in the first session about the Construction Leadership Council, who have very much stepped in now and become one of the voices of the industry and working on behalf of the industry. And they released their roadmap to recovery recently, which I think I sent you all a copy before the conference. Really, just interested in your comments really on their roadmap to recovery. You know, the 3 steps: restart, reset, reinvent. A bit like storming, norming, and forming, I think, which was a World War II expression, if I remember rightly. But much the same way. So Mark, what's your view on the roadmap to recovery, and with regards to the CLC in general, I suppose?
I think a couple of things. It did remind me very much of Latham in the sort of early 90s. Let's make construction better and everything. And the NEC came out of that, which was a plus. I did notice one thing where they talked about reducing programs by 50%. And as a tier 3 subcontractor on occasion, that would leave me a little anxious, fair to say. And again, all these things, I just hope we don't end up with the sort of race to the bottom, sort of cheapest price wins. And I think we've got an industry where we're competing on price, and whatever an ITT often says, it is price that's the determining factor. We'll have a race that continue to get these adversarial relationships.
Okay, thank you. Veronica, the roadmap to recovery, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the Construction Leadership Council has taken actually a pretty good view at actually coming up with some holistic solutions, and that is useful. And one of the other documents they have produced, which we are planning to make use of, not necessarily completely, but making use of all the basic principles, is actually of recording the costs of COVID-19. They've come up with quite a good document to do with that, and that, of course, fulfills the requirements that government has of actually being able to understand what the cost of COVID-19 is on their contracts. I think we are looking at, and there is great potential in the construction sector for us to take a stepped move forward. We've always been rather criticised in the construction sector for perhaps being one of the less efficient parts of the economy. Probably that's a slightly glib judgment, because as we all know, as practitioners, it is a little bit more complex than perhaps production line management and other things. But I think there is an opportunity here for us to reset the clock and actually start again and think, is everything that we have got into the habit of doing always necessary? And I think one of the ways that we as a client have sort of started to try to just nudge in that way is that actually not all impacts of COVID-19 are actually additional cost. I think that some of the impacts are that we are in reality working significantly more efficiently. There's certainly a lot less travel than there used to be, and that means we're actually probably spending more direct work time, and that means output of real product. So perhaps that's a good thing. I mean, the very fact we're doing this conference virtually, perhaps a good thing in comparison to actually, traveling taking time out of the day. And although it would have been a great pleasure to have met everyone face to face, actually, this means we can do it in short, discrete time slots and still do a day's work around that. So, I think there are also benefits from that.
Okay. This is the future, Veronica. This is the future of conferences now. Watch this space. So, Andrew, what do you have any sort of thoughts and reflections on their comments and CLC in general, really?
Yeah, I think as Veronica said, we are more efficient, I think, at the moment. And I think we've probably all had a bit of a chance to reflect, perhaps in your professional life and indeed personal life. And certainly we've had a chance to probably map out and plan a bit better. And I think the document which the CLC produced was actually a good piece, actually, I thought, on the whole. There was a few key takeaway points for me. One of them was actually the kind of loss of productivity and disruption, which obviously is part of our kind of day job at HK. And I think it's rather interesting that only now we're starting to think about potentially a kind of regulated approach for loss of productivity. It's something we look at time and time again. It's a key part of construction disputes, but there's never two common ways of approaching it. So I think as a sector, certainly documents like this and discussions like these will make our industry a bit stronger and more robust going forward. And I think again that one of the impacts, which is not contractual or commercial, something I feel quite strongly about, actually. I visit a lot of contractors and employers, do a lot of these kind of seminars and meet a lot of people. And one thing I find is that certainly those coming into different professions, whether it be quantity surveying or engineering, I don't think we put enough emphasis on certainly investing in these future careers. And it was quite nice to see that the CLC put together as part of the 3 to 12 month plan, a kind of item on training. And I think that's something that, despite all the issues in terms of frontline construction issues and safety and ultimately cost, I think as an industry we can't forget about continuing to develop people.
Interesting your comment, Mark. It feels a bit like sort of Latham all over again. It's not a bad thing though, actually. Latham was good for us in the 90s, wasn't it? So right, let's get down to some of the nitty gritty now that I think some of the audience are wanting to ask, and some of the sort of juicy questions really that they want to hear your advice on. So question one: would the circumstances of COVID-19 be considered a compensation event? I think I should go to the client first, Mark, don't you?
Oh, thanks.
Are you paying for it, Veronica?
Reality, if when you look at NEC 3.
Veronica, the sound and picture's not great. Can I ask you temporarily just to try turning your camera off, Veronica?
Oh, right. Okay. Sure. Definitely.
Just see whether this improves the sound. So.
Okay.
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 So, question again. Would the circumstances of COVID?
No, that's fine. So, remember, looking at COVID-19, and it would come, if it did come, under 60.119. I'm looking at the ECC contract. There's a similar clause in the PSC. So, is an event which stops the contractor completing the works. Well, does it stop? It may, and I think that's the reality. Is that One individual was asking me for a standard answer to what was the compensation event for COVID-19, and in reality it depends very much on your contract. What COVID-19 may have no impact on some contracts, it may have a partial impact, it may have a delaying impact on others and potentially some additional cost, or it may prevent that that contract being completed. Okay, so if it is an event that stops the contractor completing the works, that means you can't do it, then it is a compensation event. But for the most part, COVID-19 is in reality something that may disrupt the completion of the works, in which case I think it isn't actually a compensation event. And that's really the rub, isn't it? That we as the Environment Agency actually heavily amended that clause anyway, and we wrote in another, and you may find that a number of other public sector clients do the same, and we wrote in a number of other, let's say, events for which we gave time but not money. So I think do look very much at the Z clauses and what amendments have been made to your clause, to that clause. But actually, none of the direction of our amended NEC actually took us anywhere. So our suppliers were actually left with a problem, which in our view was not envisaged under normal circumstances, and that's why we decided to take a more equal view, and that probably many of them couldn't handle. And remember, from our perspective, the disaster scenario is that the suppliers that we have selected for their capabilities and their particular behaviour don't exist after COVID-19 settles down. So these are the suppliers that we had selected as being good enough, actually are not there, which then means we have to go to other suppliers that, for potentially good reason, we had selected not to use. And that isn't good for us and for our business. You know, clients are also there to deliver a program of works, and in our view we need a particular set of behaviors and characteristics in our suppliers. So we are mutually dependent on one another, and I wouldn't write out effectively the subcontractors as well from that entire supply chain. I may focus initially on the tier ones, but actually it's always down to the tier twos and tier threes. We know how important they are.
Thank you. So Mark, really same question to you, really. Compensation event from Shepley's perspective?
Yeah, picking up Veronica's point, I tried to avoid getting our teams to go down the prevention route. For that very reason, it's an event that prevents you from completing the works, but then whatever you're then relying on weasel words at the end of the clause, we went down the road of X2, which is a change in the law, which is Coronavirus Act March 2020. That then imposed social distancing and the lockdown. We used that as the basis for CEs for any contracts we'd signed, obviously, pre-point. We're slightly luckier because a lot of our works in the nuclear industry, we may be working on an individual building in a wider employer-controlled site, and when the employer has prohibited access to that site, we've then gone down the road of a 61(4) lack of access to the works. An instruction to stop work. And on top of that, we've benefited from the PP/20 note. And again, picking up Veronica's point earlier, the clients have actually treated us very fairly on that. As a supply chain, we're quite happy to just have basic level of cost covered and not to profit from this situation.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, I kind of see you sitting alongside this conversation going on between contractor and client, really. So what's your interpretation of the compensation event in respect of COVID-19?
Yeah, I was kind of playing NEC bingo there with the notes I have on my pad in front of me. I think everything that Mark and Veronica said is completely accurate, which is interesting, because I think there's actually probably, I've written down there's probably 3 different ways of looking at things. Before you even get to the contractual solution, I think we all have to remember what happened. So obviously this is a global pandemic which ultimately is going to stop a number of things in our industry, construction. What happened then? So we obviously knew what happened in terms of different advice from governments. Scottish government and English governments both had a similar view early on. Then how did that message transpose onto different construction sites? I think that's one of the key things. So in NEC contracts, we all know that as soon as one becomes aware or potentially aware of an event, we submit an early warning notice. And then on the basis of that early warning notice, what should happen is the parties get together, they have a risk reduction meeting, or an NEC 4 contracts, it's now called an early warning meeting. And essentially what should happen is, rather than fighting about time and money, you should be having a discussion early on to say, we know there's an issue, let's sit down and amicably discuss different ways how we could potentially resolve and mitigate. So I think first and foremost, I think there's a potential for knowing what happens in construction. A lot of those conversations didn't happen at the front end, so we're now left with a position that we're now having to try and shoehorn what's happening now into various clauses. So the various clauses I've picked up on are, as Mark said, I think clause 19. It's broadly speaking, that's an act of prevention. So prevention, from the NEC interpretation, it's 3 key things. The top of the list is the event that stops a contractor completing the works or as per the accepted programme. What should happen then, if that is an instance of prevention, the project manager should issue an instruction to stop work. I think in almost every occasion that should be the case, because I can't see any contractors out there that would be able to complete their works in accordance with their accepted programme. Not unless there's some miraculous way of conducting the activities under social distancing. So I think prevention is certainly a strong contender for one of the clauses I would look at. Then secondly, I think both Mark and Veronica touched on X2. X2 is a change in law clause which essentially protects contractors for statutory changes in law, in which I think we've seen comments in the early session where I don't think the government actually said stop work. What the government said was, we recommend you stop work. They also said, we recommend you don't travel certain locations. And then latterly in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon did instruct a stop of all construction activity. So I think depending on where you are, I think certainly X2 would work or potentially not work, I think, in England. And then I think if all else fails, if clause 19 and X2 fail, then we're back to the list of compensation events. I think 60.12 is one I would look at, which is the access of the site. So under 60.12, it's the employer's responsibility to provide contractors with access to the site. I think given the circumstances of COVID, I think there's potentially a lot of contractors out there that wouldn't have had access. And then in accordance with 60.14, which would be as a result of the earlier clause 19, the project manager instructs a stop to the works. Now, it might have been within clause 19 instruction, or it might have been for other reasons. I think there's a lot of great employers out there who've just decided, do you know what, it's unsafe to work. We're going to front up and we're going to protect our project here, and we're going to instruct people to stop. So I think in those instances, there's certainly a valid compensation event. And then lastly, there's also clause 60.15, which looks at the employer or others don't work within the time shown in the accepted programme. So there's also an impact from not just what the contractor does, but potentially other obligations from the employer or other subcontractors, which affect different parts of the work. So it's a rather long-winded way of saying depends, Phil, but I think there's certainly a strong entitlement, I would suggest, to be recovering some, or if not quite a lot, of the losses incurred.
Okay, thank you. Veronica, do you want to try your camera again? We're missing you not being on the panel here. So
okay,
that was an interesting conclusion there, Andrew. Let's give it another go. So let's pick up one or two of the audience questions now. Hayley Draver, who was busy this morning as well. I think you've just answered Hayley's question quite round, really, in terms of if so, what do you think the outcome will be? The answer, Hayley, is it depends on that one. So Chris Jones. Chris Jones asked the question, with current contracts being likely to incur multiple claims related to productivity, is it more practical to complete such contracts on a reimbursable payment mechanism? Again, I think this is one for you, Veronica, first and foremost. If you can pick that up, can you see that question? If you look at the questions down the right-hand side, if you can't hear me, then you can read Chris's question now. Right, looks like, Mark, I'm going to go to the contractor first on that one then. So.
I mean, from the contracting point of view, yes, I love reimbursable contracts. I think from the employer's point of view, how we've been treated is effectively they've just covered our costs for the period that the sites have been shut, which is fine. And I think the danger of if I was a client and work was proceeding, but proceeding in a sort of piecemeal and possibly disrupted manner, I wouldn't put the whole project on a reimbursable basis. I'd look to assess the impact of defined cost of any implemented CEs, and then whether that's in the shape of disruption to individual activities, lack of work faces open, delaying key activities, materials not being supplied. As an employer, I'd look to make sure that any deliverables that was on the accepted program was met, and I'd look to mitigate the event as much as possible, and I'd look for the supply chain to do the same. Okay.
We've lost Veronica again. I think that was the challenge of trying to get her webcam back on meant that we've lost connection altogether. The guys are working behind the scenes there, so I'll leave that question for Veronica when she comes back. What are your thoughts on that, Andrew? What's your advice to Chris on that?
Yeah, I think I think to look at the points from both sides, contractors and employers. I think it would be easy for the contractors if everything was reimbursable, because then obviously all the costs are met. But I think this goes back to one of the challenges with NEC is that whilst reimbursable on the face of it provides an ability for the contractor to recover the costs, I think we're going to see a whole host of issues, such as take furlough scheme, for example. We know there's a large proportion of the construction industry who've furloughed their workers. But if you're working in an option E reimbursable contract, for example, what's the incentive for the contractor to furlough his workers? Probably none is the answer, because if they're paying their employees the full whack, essentially they'll get a higher percentage applied to a higher cost, which I don't think is in the spirit of everything that's happening is the right way to play it. And equally, I think under the cost reimbursable contract, it's more difficult to perhaps identify the true effects of the events of COVID. So yeah, I think knowing Chris Jones from old, actually, I know he's got a contractor's background, so I think he's rather hopeful there rather than providing a balanced solution. I think option E would be great, but I don't think it's practical for employers.
Okay. Veronica, can you hear me? Do we have a delay still?
No, that's working better. I'm afraid I missed the question, but I'm back on.
Okay. If you have a look at the question down the right-hand side. It's a question from Chris Jones that Mark and Andrew have had a go at. But with current contracts being likely to incur multiple claims related to productivity, is it more practical to complete such contracts on a reimbursable payment mechanism? She likes that.
Oh, I think I would echo exactly what Andrew has said. There are clearly circumstances that cost reimbursable option E contracts are the right thing, but I would be nervous of trying to move everything to being an option E because the risk is then entirely with the employer, effectively, and that, you know, I am absolutely clear that risk sharing is an appropriate place to be, but risk sharing does not mean the entire burden of efficiency falls to the client. And remember that burden of risks is for activities which the client themselves are not controlling. So, you know, because effectively then the risk of efficiency, the efficient contractor working, would also fall to the client. And so, you know, that would not be our preferred position at all. I can totally understand why, from some people's perspective, that might work, but I think it's about both of us taking a mature attitude and a mature view of the rights, well, the responsibilities that we both need to bear. So I don't think we will be doing that.
Okay, Chris, I think you've got the view there of the client. So Steve Tyrrell, I think this is still in the same sort of trail here. Says, sorry, if you started on option A, then surely by changing the terms, could it not be argued that you're creating a completely new contract and terms? Is that right, Andrew?
Yes, Steve's absolutely correct there. Obviously, with any contract, you're as part of that document, you're identifying which NEC option you're using. So if you're changing from an option A, which Steve suggests, to an option E, that would be essentially a change of contract. So you're essentially redrafting a contract, which causes a whole host of issues.
Okay. So David Ward's interesting question. Should clients be instructing and paying contractors to accelerate to catch up due to the time lost, or should they be asking them for their recovery plan? Veronica.
Well, I think their recovery plan is very much part of the early warning discussions that, to be honest, we should be having from pretty much day one is that we actually sent out a contract advice note to all, both suppliers and those that manage contracts for the Environment Agency, to ensure that they were having their early warning meetings from the very off, effectively, that COVID-19 raised its head as being a significant issue that we were all aware of, because as Andrew referred to earlier, the early warning process is essential to mitigating the losses. Getting back on track, well, certainly I would like to see the proposals, but you can't instruct a supplier to accelerate. It is something that you need to determine their proposals and see whether it is mutually acceptable to the parties. It's not something that can be forced on the other party just because that's what the client wishes to do. Okay,
thank you. I know you nearly fell off your chair when that question came through, but we do appreciate your honesty and the fact that you're here answering these questions, Veronica, which is great. So thank you for that. It is appreciated. Andrew, is David Ward flogging a dead horse there, or do you think there's a possibility of this working? Perhaps not with Veronica, but maybe with other clients in the sector.
Well, yeah, I think in terms of NEC contracts, there's an option which I don't actually see a lot of contractors using out there, which is when you agree that an issue is a compensation event. When you get to the quotation stage, there's nothing stopping contractors providing different solutions. So, for example, you could be saying to the employer, "Listen, I've got two options here. I've got an option which, will make the program 6 months late, but I'm going to hit the budget. Or secondly, I've got an option here which I'm going to double the cost. However, I'm going to accelerate to meet the original program." So I think Dave's on the right track in terms of there is facility within the NEC contracts to do that. But I think that's more, as Veronica alludes to, there's a discussion there, there's a narrative to be had, rather than force something on the other party. There's an option to say, which one do you want? Do you want us to save some money, or do you want us to save the programme? And I think the more we have these kind of grown up and measured discussions, probably the more likely I'm not going to get any dispute work out at the back end. So I would say there's an option to do that type of thing, but present it in that way, present it as an option, not as a do or die instruction.
Okay, thank you. Chris Jones is back with another question. So, further to the response regarding reimbursable post-COVID, there is an obligation to use resources efficiently. And the question just jumped out there. Somebody posted a real big question, threw it out. There is an obligation to use resources efficiently, and therefore the use of resources can be monitored and disallowable costs be applied. The burden of administration seems to me to be potentially huge. Mark, what are your thoughts on Chris's point?
I'd agree 100%. We spend a lot of effort on cost reimbursable projects, trying to justify cost, justify hours, justify utilisation levels, justify plant that's hired or off-hired too late. And there's a lot of subjectivity in there, and especially as you noted in the disallowed cost clauses. But it's the point of view where sometimes I prefer a fixed price just for their simplicity. And the fact that you're not doing multi-million-pound valuations with 3 or 4 boxes of timesheets every month.
Okay, let's whiz through these questions. We've got them flying in now. So we've got a good one from Simon de Bourgegrave. Forgive me, Simon, for the mispronunciation. Hi, with significant impacts on material supply chains, will the negotiation power be with contractors in due course? How should this inform client negotiations with contractors at this stage? That's quite an interesting one. Veronica, would you like to start? And then we'll go to Mark on that.
I would have thought so. So I think it always behoves the client to be aware of the market conditions, okay, because clearly that will have an impact on the budgets that they set aside for a contract and a project. So it is necessary that we do understand the entire market that the contractors and our consultants work within. So clearly, if we understand that when we are undertaking those tender discussions with our contractors, we're in a better position to know whether what we're being offered is actually value for money. So I mean, I'm quite interested in hearing what Mark's view is of the way that the material supply chains, because they have been quite sincerely disrupted under the current conditions. Sometimes materials are not available from their normal sources, or they're available not in the quantity that they would need in order to make reasonable progress. Now it's beginning to recover, but certainly I would welcome the education of Mark's experience actually out there.
Over to you, Mark.
No, it's interesting because certainly as Shepley Engineers Limited, we own manufacturing business, West Cumberland Engineering, and we supply into Sellafield. And we've made a point of keeping working, obviously maintaining safety of the workforce. And that has actually stood us in good stead with certain clients. The other point to stress is, as a long-term business, we don't look to exploit sort of short-term situations. We've been working at Sellafield for the last 70 years, and we want to be there for 70 years moving forward. So we wouldn't look to take out a short-term gain on any position, recognising that employers have their budgets. They've got their lords and masters to report up to, and we want to be here in 70 years' time. That's important to us.
Thank you, Mark. Andrew, you might recall this morning, the question was raised this morning about materials coming in from overseas. You know, for instance, if they were coming in from China, and how a peculiar circumstance like that might slot into. That was in the context of JCT, but maybe if you can expand on that point, but just consider the overseas materials bit.
Well, at NEC, we've got a slightly different way of dealing with material price increases, which is it's under the contract clause X1. So X1 looks at probably a more generalised way of looking at material increases, and generally what's used is RPI, so it's a retail price index. So naturally, if the prices of various things increase, then usually a contractor is entitled to recover the cost of that increase. Equally, when using metals, there might be a specific Z clause which covers metal prices. A contract we were involved in a couple of years ago, one of the big issues was that very issue, which was delivery of steel from China. So yeah, it's certainly in terms of NEC contracts, I think X1 is certainly the go-to clause. Whether that covers current issues or not, I don't think it probably will, because there's a whole bunch of different indices which go into the RPI calculation. So I don't think that's potentially fit for purpose. I think that's maybe something that certainly employers and contract drafters want to look at going forward, because let's be honest, everybody's been absolutely caught out by this issue. I don't think anyone could ever forecast the unprecedented issues, notwithstanding materials. Yeah, so I think future contracts, I think it's certainly my opinion, it would be fair for the employer to take that risk, because I don't think contractors could potentially bear that burden. So I think we need to look at ways of identifying risks more accurately and ways of dealing with them, I think.
Okay, Simon, thanks you for your point. Iliam Costain McCade, what a great name for somebody working in this industry, raises the point on the broad consensus point of finding new ways of working. Various parliamentary committees at Westminster, such as the BEISC, Housing Communities, Local Government Committee, Scottish and Welsh Parliaments, they've either started or will undoubtedly soon commence inquiries into the impact of COVID-19 in specific sectors. Statement. My question as a result of that would be, when these inquiries are ongoing, how does one try and factor this in to contractual negotiations that could well be very protracted unless these conclusions are reached quite quickly? Or are they just advisory? Are they not going to be something that will abide by law? Veronica, can I come to you on that one first?
Oh, but by all means. I mean, I think it is very interesting, and obviously it sets the landscape in which we operate. Now, within the Environment Agency, the vast majority of our contracts are actually set through frameworks where we have already preset the terms and conditions that we operate under. So obviously that will fit the landscape specifically just prior to that framework beginning. So then when there are subsequent changes, we would need to look at, does that fundamentally alter the correctness or effectiveness of the framework that we have set up? And we obviously have various renewal points that we can work with. So our major framework at the moment is effectively 4 years, and with potential for a further 4 years. Now, our opportunity would be if these discussions actually totally change the landscape in which we all work, it may be no longer correct for us or for the suppliers. You know, it is a mutual relationship to actually continue that framework with that particular setup, because it may no longer be valid. But clearly, I think I like the longer term view that Mark was taking, that actually many of our suppliers do work with us for across frameworks for many years, and that does make a difference to the type of relationship that we have. Don't misunderstand that that's a cozy relationship, but it does mean that there is a strong level of mutual understanding that can ride the waves of some of these more difficult circumstances and the changes that occur. And I think that in itself becomes a great ground for us to actually have those mature discussions with our suppliers about what we perceive as the impact of those changes in the construction sector are due to governmental alterations, but also what their perception is. We are interested to hear their view, and we would consider, therefore, whether our stance remains appropriate. And I think that's part of a mature relationship between suppliers, whether consultants or contractors, and the client.
We're out of time, Mark, and I just want to pass back to Andrew to close. So, quick question. Are all clients as pragmatic as Veronica, Mark?
No.
Okay.
Veronica sounds an excellent client.
Yes, excellent. I was thinking the same as well. Andrew, over to you to close. So.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think that was really really informative. I think there's a bit of a contractual romance there going on between Mark and Veronica, so it's a pity. Pity there's no contracts on the go at the moment. But yeah, it was interesting topics, interesting debate. Very, very good. I think thanks to everybody for joining, and thanks to everybody in the chat section who's commented. Sometimes speaking to these things, it's very difficult when you're on your own, but when there's a bit of interaction, it works very well. But certainly, if anyone's got any issues with any of the content, I'm sure you'll be able to track me down, or any of the other colleagues from HK on LinkedIn or on the website. So thanks again, Phil, for hosting, and thanks to Mark and Veronica. Look forward to the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you, HKA. There'll now be a break for an hour, and we will be back for a session on FIDIC at 3 o'clock. So thank you again, Mark and Veronica. It was a pleasure. Glad we managed to get you, Veronica. And to you, the audience, thank you. And we'll see you again very soon. Thanks.